So to continue with our discussion of chapters 1 through 4, I last was talking about the island, Soldier Island, and juxtaposed to that kind of exterior danger of the world of nature, we have the mansion or the house. And it's described as being this kind of place I mean, it's the epitome of modernity and luxury. It's full of light and open windows. And essentially, because it's so open, there's really nowhere to hide. And if you think about like kind of the mystery genre, it's not taking place in this kind of old, creepy Victorian house where there's like dark turns and hidden rooms and all that kind of thing. It's not necessarily that kind of house, which is a source of, I think, interest and irony here. And the house is also kind of what I would like to suggest is this quasi liminal building, and it's both. Um, and by liminal, I mean it kind of blends the boundaries of outside, inside, um, modern and safe and all that kind of stuff, yet danger filled. And if you think about what a house is representative of, it's usually that kind of domestic sphere. It's a source of comfort, it's a source of security, it's shelter from both the outside world and kind of as a refuge. And ironically enough, the house, the mansion, it's not any of those things. It's not a source of security. It doesn't provide shelter from the dangers of the outside, when really the dangers are lurking within the bounds of that kind of house. But it's also kind of seen, if we look at the nature, the island as this sort of kind of wilderness, outside of civilization, as this wild, unchained territory. The house is what the group can kind of cling to as this source of order. It's civilized in that kind of manner. So keep an eye on I really want you guys to focus on like the interior exterior ironies that go on within the house. So we also are introduced as they are touring the house. Vera is the first one to notice the 10 Little Soldiers poem. And each room, as we find out, has a framed poem of the 10 little soldier boys. And it's kind of interesting that this poem really unites and unifies all the different rooms of the house, but it also unifies the characters and the different guests and the various rooms. But the poem, essentially, ironically, is about division. So we have that kind of blended binary again, or those kind of ironic juxtapositions. Because what happens throughout the course of this poem, well, each person, each little soldier boy dies. So it unifies and divides. And another source of its irony is that it's a children's poem, but it's a childhood poem about death. So we have this kind of innocence versus kind of the realities and truths of life, because what's one thing you can't avoid or escape? It's your own mortality. So moving on, some other observations from chapter 2. We get a sense from Armstrong's from Armstrong and Justice Wargrave, when we get their kind of point of view, because it kind of jumps around from character to character, that they have this pre-existing knowledge of one another. Armstrong has given evidence in Justice Wargrave's court. He knows that he has the reputation of being a hanging judge, and which basically is the source of their capital punishment of the time. And so unlike the other characters who really don't know each other, don't have anything in common, don't have this kind of pre-existing relationship, Armstrong and Wargrave do. They know each other. And then I think it's also interesting to note the individual thoughts of characters before dinner. And it's um, really kind of a sense of foreshadowing. The judge says that there's a fly in the ointment um, on Soldier Island. Marston, he can think of nothing beyond dinner. I mean, it's like that after dash question mark, which, as you'll see, I mean, he has no after dinner. So to speak. Bloor, he says it's a good thing perhaps that we can't foresee the future. General MacArthur, he says that he'd have to stay on the island, and there's something about Lombard that isn't quite straight. It isn't quite right. Lombard says that he's going to enjoy the week immensely. And Emily Brent, she reads from the Bible before she goes to dinner. And the verse that she reads ends with, the wicked shall be turned into hell. So really, we get this kind of foreshadowing of things to come. In chapter 3, the focus is really on this dinner, this interaction for really the first time between the classes. But it is if you think about dinner at this time, I mean, people dress up and it's an event, and it's a social, civilized event where they have this kind of sense of order because everything follows those kinds of hierarchies. The Rogerses serve all the other guests, and the women leave the men to have their like after dinner drinks or cigars or whatever, and it's a time for Emily and Vera to kind of get to know each other, but it also shows that kind of gendered separation between the two. And also at the dinner table we get the kind of brief notice of the table centerpiece, which is this group of 10 soldier figurines, and the judge says it's rather, childish or whatever. But again, it's a kind of a connection back to that poem where it both unifies that. I mean, the dining table is what really unifies all of these guests. The centerpiece really unifies all these guests, but it's also, as we'll see, kind of a source of that division because one by one they slowly start to disappear. Then there's the kind of big moment of the first 4 chapters, which is the indictment. And what does it mean? What is an indictment? An indictment is a formal charge of a serious crime, right? It's what happens before you go into a court of law. You are charged with something. It's this loud, ominous voice, the voice of God, perhaps, from the trumpet of a gramophone. And not to read too much into these things, but I mean, look at this. This is a trumpet, and what happens at the final to indicate our final judgment of the end of days of Armageddon is this loud trumpet sound from the trumpet of God, and the title of the indictment ends up being the Swan Song. And it's important to note that what a swan song is, it's come to realize like it's our last grand kind of exit before someone retires, or it's our last final performance before death. It dates back to this Celtic folklore where, before a swan dies, it sings this beautiful, beautiful song after remaining silent all of their lives. So there is that emphasis on silence, of keeping your mouth shut, of not telling what you know, so to speak. And the indictment accuses each of our guests of murder. And so once again, we have this unlikely group of people who seemingly have nothing in common, all united in a kind of crime, the same type of crime, this kind of guilt or responsibility. And this indictment, this loud voice, really turns something that's been really ordered into collective chaos. They've got to know where it comes from, or the voice. They've got to figure out what's going on. It really is this kind of disrupting moment of their lives. And I want to take a kind of closer look at the indictments as a whole. And there are a couple of interesting things going on here. If you notice, we've got a span of I had to pause and do the math. We've got these group of people and a list of crimes that have spanned over the course of 22 years. And each of these individually, I mean, these are the crimes that they've been accused of. And I want to draw your attention more to the language and the wording of the indictment. Armstrong did cause. Were responsible for, brought about, guilty of, deliberately sent Arthur Richmond, his wife's lover, to his death, guilty of the murder of John and Lucy Coombs, brought about the death, guilty of murder. So really, there's kind of this indication that even if they aren't necessarily directly involved in someone's death, something they have done has made them responsible for it. The only one who is distinctly different and set apart is Vera. It's downright says she killed Cyril Hamilton, which is very different than brought about the death of, responsible for, deliberately sent. So right off the rip, Vera is kind of singled out among this group of people. And I really want to explore that more as we read through the novel of what makes Vera different. So like I was saying, there's kind of these varying levels of guilt or responsibility that the indictment suggests. After the indictment, the judge kind of calls everybody to order, as he is wont to do, and they kind of review the evidence of how they all got here in the first place. And by and large, each of these people has been invited or summoned by someone with the initials UNO, either Ulrich Norman or Una Nancy. And I think it's interesting to note that Ulrich is a German name, and I mean, we are on the cusp of World War II, this giant war with Germany. So I think there's some sort of, interesting power plays there. But they've all been summoned by this unknown person, this unknown figure. And they've all been called together by this person that has appealed to something. It's either appealed to them by their self-interest, but by and large, it's monetary gain. I mean, most of them have been brought there because of their desire for wealth. Lombard is paid, he's down to his last dime, and he's paid a considerable amount of money to go and kind of see if there's going to be any kind of danger involved. Bloor, he's hired to be a private detective, which is also part of his position in society. Dr. Armstrong has been called to perform his position in society, monetarily speaking and practically speaking. But anyways, they've all been called by this unknown figure. They know nothing about their guests, which is really weird. Why would they go to a place by... Anyways. But the interesting thing, he's unknown to them, but he's all-knowing, or the person who is UNON is all-knowing about them. And that's really kind of interesting, that play on truths and what we know, or knowledge and what we gain. And it's kind of creepy and kind of frightening and scary. And I think it's meant to kind of instill this kind of ominous sense of dread that they know nothing about their guest, or not their guest, but their host. But their host knows everything about them. And then we get, um, once they figure all that out, we get their reactions or their defense against their indictment. And at first, like amongst the chaos, it's like lies, lies, wicked lies. Um, but or it's a joke. Um, but we get these really kind of logical defense or explanations of what happened. I mean, Vera tells her story about how, Cyril drowned and she couldn't get to him in time. It's not her fault. She was exonerated at this inquest. Armstrong says that, he just, not Armstrong, MacArthur says that, I sent Richmond out on recognizance, and what happened to him, he died because it was a natural event of the course of wartime. The Rogers say that, well, Mrs. Brady, she was in poor health. The phone lines were out because of a storm. I went to the doctor on foot and we didn't get there in time. Yet they inherited money because of her death. Bloor, he says, you know what? I just gave evidence at a trial and against Landor, and he died in jail because he wasn't strong enough to do kind of hard manual labor in the penal colony. Armstrong, although Bloor accuses him of performing an abortion, an illegal operation, which would have been kind of taboo at the time, which he denies, of course. He says that, Mary Cleese died of natural complications of an operation, but ironically, he admits to himself and thus to us that he had been drunk when he performed the operation, and they kind of covered it up. Mrs. Brent says nothing. She's resolved in saying nothing. She's a good person. But I think that the two more interesting characters to really look at during this kind of denial or justification of the charges laid against them are Philip Lombard and Anthony Marston. And Philip Lombard says, it's true. I did it. I left 21 Native men to die because self-preservation is, man's first duty. And so we get from Philip Lombard right off the bat, and I think we're supposed to be taken aback by his brutal honesty, both that he's kind of callous in his admission that, hey, I am responsible. He takes accountability in a way that none of the other characters do, and he's honest about it. And does that make him more trustworthy in our eyes? I don't know. That's kind of up to you guys to decide as we read through. But we also get the sense that he knows what he is. He knows who he is, and he's not kind of in denial like so many of the other characters. And then the other kind of interesting reaction to the indictment is Anthony Marston's. And he basically says, at first it's like, you know what? I don't know what they're talking about. Oh, it must have been those two kids I ran over. Silly me. I forgot. I was speeding all over the countryside, but it was an accident. Think about the trouble it caused me. I lost my license for a month. Can you believe that? Let me get another drink. Right? So he in some ways is incredibly oblivious that he's done such a thing, such a horrible thing to run. I mean, how could you forget running over two children? I would think that would be something that would stick with me. But it seems that while none of these people, saving Philip Lombard, take responsibility, of these kind of crimes, there's some logical explanation that makes them appear as if they were innocent. And like I said, Marston, he's completely oblivious. He just doesn't get it. And he really makes light of the fact that he's surrounded by these potential murderers. Um, I'd also like to point out that during this, especially this sort of scene, to pay attention to the dialogue between each characters and their inner thoughts to themselves and to each other and about each other. They're suspicious of one another's story. They're quick to pass judgment on the other characters. Like, for example, Armstrong says that Tony speeding is a menace to society, but performing an operation while you're drunk, that's nothing. So we get this kind of indication that they are passing judgment on each other, and I really want you guys moving forward to pay attention to how they view each other and what they say to other characters that they don't say to another group of characters. So finally, in our kind of last final moments of chapter 4, we get our first death, and our first death is Anthony Marston, who chokes on his drink. And I'm interested to see what you guys think of Tony Marston or Anthony Marston being our first victim of UNON, of unknown. And I mean, really, why is he the first to die? And I think that part of the reason why he's the first to die is he thinks that it's fun. He wants, unlike the other people who are scared witless and want to get off the island the next day, he's like, let's have some fun. I'm all for crime. And there's some irony in his final words. And I think that the point of his death being the first one is that it, he doesn't get it. He's so shallow and oblivious that nothing that happens after the fact is really going to kind of fall on him in the way that it should. So I'm interested to see what you guys think of Tony Marston's death, as you could see in our assignments for this week. That's it for chapters 1 through 4. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm interested to see what you guys take on our first 4, especially like how we view the individual characters. And let me know, I'm going to put in a discussion board called Talk to Me. Let me know what kinds of things that you guys want to kind of discuss collectively or want to hear me elaborate on some more. So keep reading, and then there are none. It just gets better, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think of the first 4 chapters and see how your views change as we continue with our story.